Welcome to Encounter, where we celebrate putting faith into action and community leaders who live out compassion, grace, and love. We're a program of the Broome County Council of Churches that addresses food insecurity through CHOW and the Greater Good Grocery, provides hospital and jail ministry, builds wheelchair ramps, and assists neighbors with transportation and shopping services through Faith in Action volunteers. We invite you to the conversation. Encounter your neighbors as we learn to walk together in love and kindness.
Friends, welcome to the Encounter program sponsored by the Broome County Council of Churches. I am your host among hosts here this morning. My name is Mark Kimpland. I'm the pastor at the Endwell United Methodist Church, and this being the fifth Sunday in June, we continue the tradition of bringing the whole gang together. The other hosts of the Encounter program, joining me is Reverend Joel Sellepack, the Executive Director of the Broome County Council of Churches. And to my immediate right is Reverend Jeff Kellam, the Parish Associate at Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott. Welcome.
Thank you.
Glad we're all here together. We had a brainstorm just recently, and the brainstorm it hurt. Yeah, it was really something. You should have been there. We thought it would be good to take some time and come together and talk about our experiences in pastoral ministry. On this set represents over 90 years of local church leadership, pastoral ministry in lots of different ways and settings and such. And we thought it would be a hoot if we got together and just shared some reflections, some wisdom, some lessons learned. We'll see where the Spirit takes us. But I think it's best we start with this, because all pastoral ministry begins with a call. That's where it kind of settles in, and I think that's where some of our colleagues have been lost over the years because they saw it more as a vocation than a call. But with that little caveat, Jeff, can you kind of get the ball rolling down the lane here with a brief synopsis of your call and maybe the call that you have now and how that's maybe changed?
When I was about 11, maybe 12, there was a movie called A Man Called Peter. It was about Peter Marshall, who was a Scottish citizen and was called to the ministry in a very dramatic way. I can't recall, it was something about a storm and maybe promising God if he got through the storm, he'd serve him as a pastor or something. I don't remember. But I remember it was dramatic, and it made quite an impression on me. And as I grew into my call, it wasn't anything like that. It was much more gradual. When my father died a few years ago, I wrote him a letter expressing my gratitude for our life together and all he had meant to me. And I said, the thing that probably changed my life in the most positive direction was his walking me up the sidewalk to Union Presbyterian Church for 5th grade Sunday school. And it took 6th grade Sunday school, 7th grade, into the junior high youth group, becoming moderator of the group. And so in 9th grade, the vocations form came from the Union Endicott school system to plan your high school education. And ministry was one of my 3 choices. I think because I admired my pastor, I think because I enjoyed the church work. And so I kind of grew into that. And the other 2 vocations that I had chosen on the form were kind of related to science and math, and my grades plummeted in high school. So people have said, so the ministry was all you had left to do. Well, that wasn't true. I saw this as doors opening and closing. That's the focus becoming more real. So I went to college, majored in religion, philosophy, and psychology, a tri-major, and that prepared me for seminary. And then, chose my seminary, and the rest was... Now, as this call took shape, of course, the only ministry I knew was pastoral ministry. That was my model. College opened up, chaplaincy. There was a college chaplain. And then I got involved in radio, and the rest is kind of history.
Thank you.
So what about you?
What about me? Well, I grew up in a Christian home. My mom and dad were youth directors, Sunday school teachers, that kind of thing. I had the misfortune of being asked to do the youth Sunday at church. So they basically asked me if I would preach on youth Sunday. So I got up and I did a sermon, what I consider to be a sermon. And afterwards, I had a number of the church elders walk up to me and say, "We think that you're being called into the ministry." And I said, "Well, okay." and I decided that I'd explore it a little bit, but it was not necessarily where I had thought of myself. I really wanted to be into academics and that kind of thing. I've always had a love for books. My mom tells me that my first sentence was "I got book," and it has been a constant companion through the ages. And as I got into college, I ended up in a small Bible college in Australia because my family moved there.
Wow.
And I was attending this Bible college kind of as a bridge. My credits would transfer from there to Indiana Wesleyan or to someplace else that would be not necessarily ministry related. I had, at that point, Tony Campolo was my hero, and I had wanted to go into sociology, kind of like him, and that kind of thing. And while I was at college at Kingsley College, we had to do a worship service for people, and afterwards the principal of the school came up to me and he said, "I think you look pretty good up there. I think that kind of fits with you." And I remember hearing that, going, "Well, okay, that sounds good to me too." And so I ended up having that door open, and it was both an inner and an outward journey. I mean, it was the community of faith around me, as well as what I believed my own gifts and graces were, and even today, the idea "I got book." All you have to do is go into my office, and you'll see books everywhere. Yeah. And it's been something that both thoughtful kind of in a way, and also connecting the thoughtfulness with practical things, which is something that I feel very strongly about. That it isn't just a head trip. That when our minds met and we had that crash earlier, that gave you the headache, it still is with me as well. And I think that's part of what makes me tick today, even, is the idea that when we're doing a grant application, or if we're putting something together on a piece of paper, that something tangible is coming out of that. Right. It's not just about some Gnostic thought, that I've got going on in my head. Right. It's about practicality. Yeah.
Thank you.
What about you?
Mine was very gradual. I do remember a moment, my junior year in high school. I was on a youth group retreat at Camp Casawasco, and I felt a nudge. I did. And then I ran the other way as fast as I could. I too grew up in a very Christian home. I lived 4 doors down from the church. We walked to church every single Sunday. I went to the early service. I went to Sunday school after. My mother sang in the choir at the late service, so I had to go to that one too. And I had a youth group at night. All of those experiences kind of formed my call. And I was asked in college to speak at college Sundays for 3 consecutive years. They would ask me to do the sermon, and I received a lot of good response from that and such things, which was very, very helpful for me, because I was the kid you did not want in Sunday school. If you get my drift. I was kind of a hellion, and sports was really all I was really concerned about. But it was because that congregation, in spite of me, cared for me and loved me, supported me, identified some gifts in me that I didn't see, why I'm doing what I am doing today. And I always reinforce that with the congregations I've served. The only reason I'm here is, yes, I have a call, but a congregation cared for me when I was not very caring back to them.
Right.
And that's just profound, because within the United Methodist tradition, all calls start with a local church.
Yeah.
You have to be recommended by the local church in order to go forward.
Yeah, same with the congregation I grew up in.
Yeah.
So you grew up Methodist.
I did, yes.
I grew up Presbyterian. You grew up in
Evangelicals like Nazarene, Wesleyan, Christian Missionary Alliance, bunch of them.
And so now, what denomination are you now?
United Methodist, Wesleyan.
Okay.
I'm still trying to figure that out.
You're still in the mixer.
But I am. I've been recognized by the United Methodist Church.
Okay.
Yes. Friends, we have Reverend Joe Sellepack and Reverend Jeff Kellam with us today to talk about ministry. And in this moment, we're going to kind of take you behind the curtain a little bit of pastoral ministry. And we're going to talk maybe more about specifics about pastoral ministry. And I'd like to start here. What have been the great joys? What have been the great joys of serving in that capacity?
I think, I'll go back to my ordination into electronic media. I was ordained to do that. But as I went to the Montreat Music and Worship Conferences, my wife was a musician, church musician, and so she was going for the music part. I was going to Montreat Conference Center for the ministry part. And so I'm not working in pastoral ministry, but boy, I'll tell you, those worship experiences there kind of drew me into a desire to lead worship. Because I had seen worship led almost mechanically by many pastors. Because it got to be, there was a sameness there, and there wasn't much passion, there wasn't much personality. And I thought, I think I could do a better job. So I became an associate pastor for liturgy and congregational care. And designing the liturgy to help people express their gratitude, to pray, to build a service that incorporated music thematically into the rest of the service. I really liked the drama and the theater of what worship could be. So for me, the wonderful experiences were in worship and music, that part of ministry. That was the joy of ministry for me. On the other side of the coin, I wasn't a very good visitor. I didn't visit in people's homes. Being an introvert, I could summon up what I need to lead worship. But man, you better give me time for a nap in the afternoon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a great joy.
Yeah.
That afternoon
That
nap.
Yes. we have that in common. I've discovered.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Joe, what about you?
Well, I would take the opposite tact than Jeff. I did like doing the worship leading and that kind of thing, but for me, the relationships with people in the church, I would be the minister who would call. I did a lot of calling, and I heard a lot of stories, and for me, even that it was kind of like getting a new book when I would run into a person, because I would be asking them all kinds of questions about their life, and then we would be conversing about my own personal life. I like being a public figure. Don't get me wrong, but it was that the personal relationships with people that where things would become real for me. And I remember actually one of the first pastoral calls I was asked to do was with a person who was dying in the church, and I ended up going with the family. I was part of the family, and we were praying for this woman, and we were all around her bed, and I was holding hands with everybody around the room, and leading them in prayer. And I read some scripture. I remember reading Psalm 23 because it was her favorite psalm. And then at the end, we said the Lord's Prayer together. And I remember the tenderness and the feeling of being with people as they were grieving. And I found that to be really profound for myself. It was something that I really connected with. And then after that, there were other moments kind of like that, where for me, it was more of the personal interactions with folks, and then them getting to know the real Joe Sellepack less than, because when you're up in front of people and you're leading worship, there's a sense in which I remember Graham Greene, I think it was, who had a book where he talked about the glittering image of ministry, and that was kind of the glittering image of Joe Sellepack. It was the one that was up in front of people, that was leading people, and it wasn't until that image goes down that you actually welcome people into your life, that you actually have an impact on them, because they can only know a glittering image for a little while before they realize that it's all just it's all performance. But when we're in the same room, they're going through probably the hellish moments of their own personal life, that you actually have that in to talk with them. And I find that to be profoundly moving for me. Yeah.
For me, my greatest joys I've experienced have been with the children and the youth. I love children's time. It's probably a sin, but I'll confess, I covet that time. That 4 or 5 minutes that I have with the kids, and we've done just the craziest things, and because I know it's for the adults. The children's time.
People say that.
You can be your authentic self. You can goof, you can do experiments, you can do magic tricks, you can do all kinds of stuff, and just seeing their eyes light up and making the connections, between what's happening here and what's happening here, and that's just been really sacred. And I think the second is, I can relate to you, Joe, that having that holy invitation to be with people as they grieve. I do a lot of funerals for unchurched people, and that has been a ministry of mine since day one. And just to be invited into that sacred space, and one of the greatest joys just happened just recently there. It was a family, very dysfunctional on many levels, and they admitted that, and there was divorces and hurts and brokenness all around, unchurched, did not know anything about faith. But it was one of the most deeply moving funerals that I had ever experienced, because at the end, I hope you can make the connection there. At the end, they played the song and they began to sing together to honor this man, Simple Man by Leonard Skinner.
Oh, wow.
But in that moment, I had never heard a hymn sung in church or anywhere else as sacred as that messy moment when they all just blended their voices together, and that was one of the greatest joys I've ever experienced.
That's amazing.
It was just amazing. What about the other side? What about the flip side? We look behind the curtain of pastoral leadership, and there's hurts, and there's pain, and there's brokenness. We've only got about 9 minutes left, but anything that you want to share with our viewers and listeners?
I'll mess up the order a little bit, and I'll go. So I followed a minister who had been in the church for 26 years, and I
know what that's like.
Well, I know, and I was the young buck out of seminary that was coming into this situation, and this minister did not want to leave the church. He had a health issues, bunch of other stuff that kind of came in, and if he had his druthers, he would have stayed in the small town and still been a part of everything. But and so he was my constant judge, the person who would be looking at everything I do, putting it underneath the microscope, and trying to figure out whether I measured up or not. And I remember that there was this one funeral where I was being asked to do the funeral, and I was, and the couple said to me, it was a sister and a brother, said to me, Jerry would come back and do the funeral if you let him. And I said, well, I'm not going to let him. And he can come back and do the eulogy, and I would let that happen. But I'm going to do the funeral. Yeah. And they said, okay, that would be fine with them. So then I tell Jerry, they want you to do the eulogy. I'm going to do the funeral. Yeah. And I find out down the road that he actually started talking with people on the church board that I had offended him. And I had to go I had to basically apologize to him, and if I wanted to keep my job. This was more one of those situations where it's a congregationally based thing. And so I walk into they had this one room, and it was kind of weird. You had this, it was called the Stevens Parlor, and that's where the board met, and there were a bunch of things, and there was this big picture of Jerry and Linda on the wall, and right next to it was like this small little cross. It was like this big, but the picture of Jerry and Linda was like huge. And I walk into that room, and I start yelling. I remember yelling at the picture, and I'm going, this is a demon that is attached to this church. It is not going to move forward until it gets over this. I was laying my soul. I was crying and all the rest of it. And then at the end of that, I walk into my office. I pick up the phone with tears still coming down my face. I call him on the phone and I apologize. And so I'm keenly aware of that, and I still remember that moment. And whenever I've left a congregation, I've never done that.
Yes.
And even as I start thinking, I've been at the Council of Churches now this is my 18th year. I'm starting to think about when do I leave and how do I leave?
Yes.
Because you don't want to leave in that kind of a way.
Yes.
And leaving is as important as entering into a congregation. And that's something that I've come to understand about myself.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. Yeah. Jeff, what about you?
I've always through the churches that I've served, I've always felt respected, loved, enjoyed. But there was one church where there was a small posse, and I'd not ever had that experience before of a small group that was very critical of my leadership, primarily because of changes that were taking place in the church. After someone had been there for about the same amount of time your predecessor had been there. And so these were natural changes, but they needed to have someone to pin the blame on. So this was difficult, not only for me, but also for my wife, that these were things that were not dealt with me personally face to face, but they went around the pastor to go to personnel committees and that kind of thing. And we got through it, but it was a very difficult time, and the face-to-face communication would have been much more helpful. But I think they probably thought they wouldn't have been listened to, and that's probably on me. But again, we survived it, and it's one of the few times that I had a rough time with leadership within the church. Because ordinarily, things were kind of smooth. Even going through those rough transitions of what's going on in the world around us. The gay and lesbian issue, for example, came up at our church in Richmond, but because it was a pretty progressive church, we moved through that issue and became quite a welcoming church. And we're talking about the mid-'80s, not the more recent controversies. So that's
I think behind the curtain of pastoral leadership, there's brokenness that
really
doesn't
is.
get seen. Or at least we don't want to become that vulnerable so that it gets seen. Because mine has always been when people leave. Don't take it personally, Pastor, but we're leaving your church for whatever reason it might be.
It's nothing you said, or
just some of the courage to open the door for them and say, okay, I hope you land somewhere where you can find community if it's not here.
Yeah.
But still, that can grate.
Yeah, well, it's a rejection of your ministry or
sorts. Yeah. We have just a few more minutes left, and I just thought this would be an intriguing question to ask for us to entertain. Amidst the clergy shortages and shortage of priests and just local church leaders, those that do decide to answer their call and begin the process of being in pastoral leadership in the local church, what would you give as one piece of advice? What's one mantra, one bit of wisdom that you would give a person, whether the person's young or middle-aged or older, but entering into this call? Do you have a piece of advice in the last 2 minutes?
The piece of advice I was given when I was in, I was still in college, and the minister of a church that my parents were going to after they moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, his advice to me was stay out of the ministry if you can.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know what he meant by that.
Yes.
That once you're involved, you're involved.
You're pretty much
Especially
involved.
when you've majored in religion in college and you've gone to seminary, you're not trained to do anything else. So you better make sure.
Absolutely.
But my advice to someone would be to keep looking for the light. Just if you're feeling that nudge, you're feeling that call, just keep looking for all the ways you can use your gifts and your skills.
Yeah.
All of your abilities are called upon in ministry. Not just whether you're a good communicator, not just a good listener. You're in for it all.
It's the whole thing. Yeah.
So Helmut Tillich has a book called
It's from a book. See, it's from a book.
Handbook for a Young Theologian, in which I was handed this book when I first entered into seminary, and he basically says, I suffer not a young theologian to speak. And he says, you do not ask somebody to sing who has not been prepared. Mm-hmm. You would not ask a young theologian to speak without being prepared. I still live by that. I think that for me, the best part of ministry is actually silence. And I think that that the idea that we go right into speaking is not correct. With the majority of sermon preparation happens in the study when you're by yourself, and it requires a lot of introspection. I always give that advice.
Yeah.
Too bad we don't have time for your advice.
Yeah. my last nugget would be to someone that's just beginning and such is you have got to find and develop tools and gifts and graces to relate with every generation.
Yeah. Good.
Whether it's the kids, the youth, you might not be crazy about a certain segment, but you better learn to be somewhat crazy about it, or the call will be very difficult to fulfill. Joe, Jeff, thank you for being a part of this behind the curtain look at pastoral ministry. I thank you both for your friendship and also your leadership. And friends, I hope you have a blessed day, and let's keep looking for those leaders that will lead the church in the next generation. God bless you all. Have a great day.